Oh, hey. Just kidding. That's me being silly. I'd never know how to start these videos, so I did that. Um, my first exposure to a bass fishing club was the West Coast Bass Anglers, which don't really exist nowadays. I think there's maybe a couple people trying to hold it on. But it was a bass fishing club, and I joined when I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school. I was living on my own in Vancouver for the first time, and I was intimidated. I was scared, but I was looking for something to connect with that reminded me of back home. And when I found out there was bass fishing in the Lower Mainland, I was ecstatic. I went out there and I met a guy who was part of this club, and he invited me to join the club and go to a meeting. And I did, and I just hit it off right away. And I was so excited to meet a community of guys who liked the same thing I did, and we had a lot in common, and I felt really good about it. Now, like I said before, the majority of them old, male, white. In fact, I think that was almost all of them. There might have been a few guys that were Asian, but otherwise, that's it. It's a very homogenous group at the time, and the leader of the club was somebody who had a bit of a cult of a personality deal with him. Like, he was sort of like the man, like he was the guy. He had that great man aura about him where you're like, okay, that's the guy. Like, you know, he's the leader when he walks in a room. And that was how the club was run. It was like this guy's ego kind of pushed the club along. And that could be good, but it could also be really bad. And what I saw happen in the club was a lot of exclusivity, where it's sort of like, okay, you don't think how we think, we got no room for you. And judgment, a lot of judgment about like people that thought of things a different way, or people that he just didn't seem eye to eye on would always seem to get pushed out of the club in a hurry. So there was no sort of feeling of like different thoughts or different ideas floating around. It's kind of like his way or the highway. And it worked for a few years, but I also saw the club just sort of collapse under the weight of such an ego being sort of forced upon people, and that he lost a lot of people that were like good members and good guys just because of like internal conflicts, and internal conflicts essentially tore the club apart. So when I moved to Penticton in 2012, I think it was 11, I wanted to start my own bass club, and I was a few years removed from the West Coast Bass Anglers, which I think I last participated in 2008. But I wanted to make it different than the experience I had with the West Coast Bass Anglers. And that I didn't want, if I was leading it, I didn't want to be the guy that is the sort of, you know what I'm talking about? The guy, the cult of personality guy, the great man leader. I never really felt like that. I always kind of saw myself as more of like a beta style leader, where I was more like of a guide on the side, a servant leader, if you will, to borrow from Sergio Vanni. And so I wanted to start a club in that respect at the time. And I didn't know who Sergio Vanni or any of these guys were at the time. I just knew that I wanted to do things differently. And this is the story of how the Okanagan Bass Anglers came to be. Stay tuned. Next.